Why Brittney Griner will stand for the national anthem this year. What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning in. If you're new to my channel, I'll introduce myself. My name is Simon Hill. I'm a Black American from Louisiana who's been traveling across the world and giving my experiences about what it's like to be Black in different countries and in different spaces, and pointing out how much anti-Blackness exists in those countries and spaces because there is a severe lack of content related to that on YouTube or in media in general. Yes, there are other Black YouTubers who travel. Yes, there are other Black people who write about their experiences traveling. But too many of those people suck dick. Too many of those people have corporate masters. Me, I'm just one guy by myself. I keep it real. I keep it raw. I keep it Black on this channel. And nobody tells me what to say but me. And I always keep it true to myself and to you. And if you like what I just said there, you're going to love being a subscriber to this channel. So hit the subscribe button, hit the like, leave a comment, and share. Now, I don't only write or talk about traveling. I don't only talk about my experiences as a Black person. I'm a multifaceted, multidimensional, paradoxical person, just like you. I'm a Muslim. I'm an English teacher. I'm fat. I'm bald. I sweat a lot. I'm an amateur guitarist. I'm a bad rapper. I'm a husband. I'm a Muslim. I'm a friend. I'm a pretty nice guy, and I'm also pretty smart. And today we're going to talk about something that just interests me. It's about Brittney Griner standing for the national anthem. My wife sent me this story because she's helping me generate content to talk about here. And she sent this story along with the quote. My wife is Turkish, so this is Turkish saying time. In Turkish, they have a quote that goes something like this when you translate it into English. If a person is drowning, they'll reach out for anything to save them, even a snake. Now, for people who don't know, Brittney Griner is a famous Black American woman who is a professional, if not the best professional woman basketball player. And she got caught up in a very bad situation a few months ago when she was basically kidnapped by the Russian government, thrown in jail for having a small amount of marijuana in her luggage, and was sentenced to like 10 or 20 years in a Russian gulag. But the U.S. government was able to free her after some negotiations. There was some controversy related to her release because the U.S. government, some people say, should have tried to free another American who is locked up over there in Russia named Paul Whelan. And they exchanged Brittney Griner for a guy named Victor Bout, who is a Russian arms dealer who is selling guns illegally across the world, and America locked him up. But America and Russia play this tit-for-tat game because of their geopolitical, differences. Americans lock up Russians, and then Russians lock up Americans, or vice versa, and then they exchange them back and forth all across the world because of, for many, many different reasons, but primarily right now because of the war happening between Russia and Ukraine, and NATO is supporting Ukraine, which is, fighting against Russia. And it's a whole bigger story. But I want to talk about this because it relates a lot to, Black people and our relationship with the country and our ability to protest and our patriotism, how it's questioned often. One of the proudest moments in my life was when I was in high school. I'm going to tell you a story, a very brief story. I was 18 years old. It was my senior year in high school, and it was time for the Pledge of Allegiance. For people who are not from America, generally, if you go to public schools in the U.S., at least in my case, in every public school I ever went to, and also in private school as well, in Louisiana, you have to stand up every morning at the beginning of school and say the Pledge of Allegiance, which is, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All the kids stand up in class, look at the flag, put their hand over their heart, and recite this. It literally makes me sick saying this because it's so hypocritical if we really know the true history of the U.S. But during the first period of the day, I was walking down the hallway, right? I asked the teacher if I can go get some water for class. The teacher said, yeah, Simon, it doesn't matter. Go ahead. I'm walking down the hallway to go to the water fountain to get some water, and it's nobody in the hallway but me. But up ahead is the school secretary, an older white lady, sees me walking, and then on the PA comes on the national anthem. She stops immediately, puts her hand over her heart, and then she looks to the right and sees me walking, and she says, "You stop right now and say the Pledge of Allegiance." And I say, "No, I'm not going to stop. I don't have to stop. And I'm going to go get my water." And she literally has a fit. She starts crying. I am not lying to you. She starts crying, having a fit. And then she runs to the office of the principal. I'm like, well, that was crazy. I get my water. I return back to class. The principal and the assistant principal say, "Simon, come with us." Mind you, The principal is a black woman. The assistant principal is a black man. Two older people. They're sitting my black ass down in their office and they're questioning me why I don't want to say the Pledge of Allegiance at school. And I tell them straight up, I don't want to. It's not my flag. It's not my country. I don't care about America. America's an evil, horrible place for black people and for all poor people and to millions of people across the world. I didn't say this, or I didn't do this action to be a rebel. I didn't say this to be an ass to the lady in the hallway or to the principal and the assistant principal. I said that because that's what I wholeheartedly believe. I know it might be foreign for people to imagine that young people, specifically teenagers, can have advanced political beliefs or morals that they believe in, but that's what I did. How do I know that's what I did? Because that's what I still believe now. America's an evil, horrible place. If you don't believe me, ask the Vietnamese what it was like when the Americans came. Ask the North Koreans what it was like when the Americans came. Ask right now the Cubans what the Americans are doing there with the embargo. Ask the Native Americans what happened when they interacted with the U.S. government. Ask most sensible black Americans their relationship with the United States. I grew up in Louisiana seeing Confederate flags hanging outside. I grew up in Louisiana where the poor part of town was definitely the black side. I grew up in Louisiana at that same high school I went to. All of the special ed classes were filled up with black kids who were poor and dispossessed. Meanwhile, all the honors and advanced class were filled up with white people. Why? Why? Because the rich white kids had enough ability to hire tutors to make sure that they got the best grades, and some of them even bribed their way into the honors classes. Meanwhile, all the poor black kids get treated like shit, told to go to special ed classes where their education is low. That's why I didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance. That's why I don't say it now. That's why I won't stand for your horrible flag, for your Nazi flag. If you see the American flag, it's no different than the Nazi flag. That flag deserves to burn, in my opinion. My black ass opinion. But every black person doesn't think like me, and that's okay. Black people's blackness should not be questioned by their patriotism to the U.S. because no other group of people deserve to be treated like patriots and express their patriotism any sort of way other than us. We've been standing up for America since the very beginning. When Crispus Attucks took that first bullet for the United States of America, when they were fighting for their freedom from the British, we've been here from the beginning, literally built the nation on our backs. So nobody can tell any black American that they shouldn't say the Pledge of Allegiance or that they should. It's our American right to do so or not to do so. That was a little rant that I wanted to say, but let's get to the article because I have a lot more to say and you're in for a big treat. Lindsay Kagawa Kolas is the writer of this article. It was published on May 19th, 2023. Now, Kagawa Kolas is the executive vice president for talent and the collective at Wasserman, where she represents Brittney Griner and other top athletes. This is why it's very important for people to read the small text in every article, because this article will definitely be biased towards Brittney Griner because she is literally her agent. She's speaking on Brittney's behalf, and she's going to write a fluff piece for her, but it's still worth reading because reading is important. Speaking out, standing up, sitting in, taking a knee. This is speech, the vocabulary of activism, as embraced by athletes of all stripes, expressed since the dawn of televised sports. Tonight, when viewers tune in for the tip-off of the 2023 WNBA season, they'll see a league with activism deeply woven into its DNA, using the full range of this vocabulary to remind us of what patriotic protest at its best is all about. I have to say this very quickly. The WNBA is one of the major sports league in the United States, along with the NBA, the NFL, the MLB. Sports is very big in America. In most countries around the world, people just love football or soccer, right? But in the U.S., we have many different sports that people worship, particularly basketball, American football, and baseball, right? These sports are primarily made up of players who are of minority descent, mostly black people, right? In the MLB, it might be less, but definitely in basketball, it's a lot of black people. And in the NFL, it's definitely a lot of black people. Why is that? Many people who are stupid and who don't think critically or don't read will say, well, black people must be naturally smarter, or not naturally smarter, naturally stronger, have more muscle, have stronger twitch muscles, all this other sort of things like that, which is not true. The reason why so many black people dominate in sports in the U.S. is because for decades, if not centuries, we were locked out of doing other sorts of jobs. So the same way the Jews were locked out of doing other sorts of businesses, so they ended up in finance and then ended up in Hollywood, the same thing thing happened to black people. We couldn't become lawyers, doctors, engineers traditionally. So what were our avenues for financial success? It was through sports. Finally, when they integrated the sports leagues, we were able to make real large amounts of money through our talents, and many black parents pushed their children into that. And in the culture and society, specifically where I was in Louisiana, they pushed black boys into doing that. My high school that I went to, Neville High School, redistricted itself. It's a 50-50 white-black school when I was going there, right? But Neville definitely wanted to win the National Football Championship. So what they did, they changed the district just to allow Neville to recruit more black students to go there, because they knew that these black students, they could push into the sports league, and they didn't care about their academics at all. They knew that they could get these poor black boys to come play in the sports league because they wanted them to have the dream of one day going into the NFL and making millions of dollars. What happens right now in the U.S. when it comes to black men and sports is very sick. There's just a constant push to put us into sports because that's the box that they've put us in. They don't allow us actually to go nowadays. Recently, in the past few decades, we've been able to rise up in careers. But literally, in my my grandparents' generation, it was unheard of to see black lawyers and black doctors at full capacity if you weren't just serving black people, right? So, that's just, I just have to talk about that because there's so many people who are just dumb and don't know that part of U.S. history. So, the NBA has come to be defined by its players' ability to lead through the challenges of the moment. It's a league of women who have expressed their voices and exercised their power in ways that have set the standards for collective action. Negotiating a landmark collective bargaining agreement, dedicating the 2020 season to social justice, declaring that Black Lives Matter, and emblazoning Breonna Taylor's name on their jerseys, standing strong with teammate and sister Brittney Griner, while galvanizing the Biden administration to help bring Brittney home from a horrific 10-month detention in Russia. These are all the hallmarks of an engaged, passionate community that is fluent in the language of social justice and savvy about shaping the national discourse. Once again, if you're dealing with a large amount of black people together, especially in the United States, we're going to have some people that are going to say, you know what, I'm going to use my platform to speak out against injustice. That's the reason why so many people want these NFL players, these basketball players to, stand up for social justice, because these black men and women who have reached untold levels of influence and fame and fortune have a platform to talk about our issues, which they should. And I do agree with it. LeBron James does this, wearing a shirt that says, I can't breathe, and donating money and time to social justice causes. That's what will happen, and that's what should happen. But nobody's patriotism or blackness should be questioned because they decide to protest. I'll continue reading. Last year, most WNBA teams chose to remain in their locker rooms during the national anthem, in a gesture of unified protest against the incongruity between the values the anthem signifies and the realities for black people in America. This year, as so much remains unchanged, some teams or players may do the same. Others may sit or kneel. Still others, including Brittney Griner, plan to stand up, physically for the anthem itself and symbolically for the rights of their peers to make themselves heard and express dissent loudly and boldly, and in accordance with the proudest traditions of this country, however they see fit. Now, some people might call Brittney Griner a sellout because before she was sitting or kneeling for the national anthem, right? And even if she was or wasn't, because I don't follow sports, I'll be honest with you, I couldn't care less about sports, not because it's the WNBA, but just because I feel like it's a waste of time. Some people might say Brittney Griner is a sellout. She might have been protesting the season before, but because the U.S. government was able to free her in Russia, now she's, standing up and pledging allegiance to the flag. Some might say that. I don't see it as that. I think that's just being grateful, just being honest. And honestly, Brittney Griner has a lot of eyes on her. She's become a symbol to many people across America, of America doing right by its citizens abroad. So they might view this as, being ungrateful if you don't stand up. And you know what? Under some pressure and under certain circumstances, I can understand people, capitulating to the pressure. Honestly, Brittney Griner, met with the president, was in a horrible situation, and literally the U.S. government saved her. So she has some reason to love America. America. The reason a lot of white people love America, because America has traditionally saved and protected and pushed and promoted a lot of the things that allow white people to succeed in America, which is why they can say they love it. But as black people, we know that the U.S. government has turned its back on us many times. Many poor people know the U.S. government has turned its back on us many times. But if the government did decide to help us, maybe we wouldn't have such, ardent beliefs against America. Brittney Griner can stand for the anthem because not only is that her right as an American, but because the U.S. government was literally her homie. The U.S. government literally paid her bail. C'est la vie. All of the above is sure to be misinterpreted, in some cases willfully, by the same shut up and dribble voices that reflexively attack and distort every principled expression of athlete dissent, from Muhammad Ali's refusal to fight in Vietnam to Dr. John Carlos and Tommy Smith's raised fist at the 1968 Olympic Games, to the Minnesota Lynx players wearing Black Lives Matter shirts in 2016, to Colin Kaepernick's decision to take a knee. But sports do not exist in a vacuum. Like art, politics, music, and every other thread that make up our culture, sport is woven inextricably into the life of this nation, which means our national life always bleeds into the sports pages, especially when the basic rights and even the lives of athletes and their families are what's on the line. By the way, a lot of people view Muhammad Ali as an American hero, but in his lifetime, when he was standing up against the Vietnam War and saying no Viet Cong ever called me nigger, a lot of people in America said, you know what, he's a traitor. He's not a good citizen. He should be in jail. And Muhammad Ali is a hero because he risked his life to fight for what he believed in. He lost his title. He lost his money. Now we view him as a hero, right and left. But at the time, we have to remember the right conservatives were hating on Muhammad Ali. And they also hate any other leader who stood up in the past. Our history as black people in America is full of people who fought for the best for America. Most people look back now at the Vietnam War and say it was wrong. But in Muhammad Ali's lifetime and many other people who stood against the Vietnam War in their lifetime, they were viewed as heretics, as traitors, as treasonous people, as seditious people. But we have to remember what we stand for now will absolve us in history. We stand for what's right now because we know in the future what the future will bring. They're not going to be supporting all these sorts of things that the government of the U.S. does later. We have to say no to the Iraq War, no to Afghanistan, no to drone strikes in Somalia and that sort of thing, because that's what history will say is wrong when we look back in time. I hope that makes sense to you. I'm ranting right now, but I'm going. Let's go. As a league led by black and brown women, members of the LGBTQIA plus community and allies, activism has been a fact of life and a condition of survival since the WNBA's inception. By daring to exist, let alone excel, in spaces that were never intended for them, women athletes are doing something inherently revolutionary every time they take the court. Which is why, despite the acute shock and horror felt by every member of the WNBA family, from players and coaches to agents and fans, at the news of Brittney's detention last year, the activist league knew exactly how to respond. Brittney had been playing in Russia due to pay inequity rooted in racism, sexism, and homophobia. The reality that those same forces are what made her an ideal political pawn for Russian President Vladimir Putin kept every WNBA player exceptionally focused and unified, and rallied others, from members of the public to journalists who heeded warnings about Brittney's safety in an effort to aid her return. Now I have to say, once again, a lot of players from the NBA to the WNBA play overseas because, the NBA is very hard to get into or stay in, as well as the WNBA. And there are many other opportunities for players across seas. That's because in these leagues, it's just you're hot for a moment and then the next young player comes in. So I get what they're trying to say, that, WNBA players make less than NBA players because of sexism and racism, but I doubt that's because of, how can I say this? Pay inequality from the owner's perspective, but it's because a lot of people don't watch these sports because, people don't find women's sports as entertaining, from my understanding, right? And that's probably why a lot of female players don't make as much money as male players. But the same thing applies to a lot of male players as well. Not every NBA player makes $1 million or $1 billion like LeBron James. A lot of these guys make six figures, yes, but then they have to go overseas to supplement their income and get as much money as they can while they're still young and hot. But let's continue. Having been put in a literal cage too small for her frame, stripped of her essential American freedoms, and deprived of even her most basic rights during a sham trial and unjust sentencing, Brittney, supported by many other players, will make a statement this WNBA season by standing tall for those uniquely American freedoms, the most important of which being the absolute and inviolable and constitutionally protected freedom to stand, sit, kneel, praise, protest, and otherwise make your voice heard. In their acceptance and celebration of one another's liberty to choose different ways to express themselves, the WNBA athletes are celebrating what it means to be a patriot. They are transforming the sadistic stunt of Brittney Griner's detention, intended by Putin to serve as a racial and political wedge, into a reminder of the vibrancy, the diversity, and the strength of everything that America's adversaries hope to defeat. Not least, every single one of them is standing in unmistakable solidarity with Brittney, even if they happen to be making their stand by taking a knee. And I stand in solidarity with Brittney. I just want to make this very, very, very clear what my point and opinion is. Brittney Griner is an unambiguously black woman, right? She's a person who went through a very terrible situation in Russia, right? And possibly she was targeted because of her race, because of her identity, because of her celebrity. So Putin and the Russian authorities said, you know what, if we take her, we'll have a very, very powerful chip in negotiating with the Americans when it comes to this war situation with Ukraine, or our prisoners of war, or our prisoners that are over there in America, like other Russians who are imprisoned in America. We have a very big bargaining chip by snatching up this famous basketball player and bringing her here, right? And the U.S. government bailed her out. I'm thinking about this very simply. I'm going to keep it very raw and simple. If Brittney Griner was my homie and I bailed her out, and even if Brittney Griner didn't like some of the things I did, like, for example, she knew that I was an abusive father to my children, or that I was a drug dealer or something like that, and she didn't like that, but I bailed her out, I would expect Brittney to show me some gratitude. Yes, I know that that's a very, very bad comparison, because the U.S. government continues to inflict harm on people that look just like Brittney every single day, right? But at the very least, when you're under that sort of pressure, that sort of microscope, that sort of gaze from the public, Brittney can't always be like on code like that. And besides, she might stand for the anthem and donate all the proceeds she gets from donations to her GoFundMe to Black Lives Matter. Or she might, bail out protesters who are wrongfully arrested. Or she might be paying for young black kids to go to college. Just because somebody shows their patriotism doesn't mean that they're not down for the cause of black liberation, fighting against white supremacy, standing up against oppression, right? So I want to make this very, very clear how I feel about Brittney. She has every right as an American to do what she wants to do, to stand for the flag, not stand for the flag, sing the anthem, fart the anthem, whatever she wants to do, right? But let's talk about the anthem itself. It's a very racist document. More proof, the U.S. national anthem has always been tainted with racism. This was written by Jefferson Morley and John Schwartz, originally for TheIntercept.com, published on September 13th, 2016. Our current difficulty in facing our past honestly and soberly strongly suggests that we are still a long way from laying it to rest. Let's read this here because I think it is very, very interesting. The decision of San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick to sit during the pregame playing of the national anthem has had a larger impact than anyone could have foreseen. President Obama has weighed in, endorsing Kaepernick's constitutional right to make a statement. When Kaepernick changed his protest to kneeling instead of sitting, teammate Eric Reed joined him. Brandon Marshall of the Denver Broncos followed suit and lost an endorsement deal. Marcus Peters of the Kansas City Chiefs raised a fist during the anthem, a la John Carlos and Tommy Smith at the 1968 Olympics. An unidentified Navy sailor who took a seat in solidarity with Kaepernick may face disciplinary action. The protest has even spread to high school players across the country. This is why, and I want to go back to the point I made about, standing up for what's right now, because history will absolve us. When I was in high school, right, and I decided not to say the Pledge of Allegiance, that was unfashionable. It wasn't in vogue then to be anti-American, not for the sake of just being anti-American, but for the sake of standing up against injustice and standing up against evil and protesting that to make the country better. That was unheard of. That was back in 2009, possibly, when I did that, right? Because I was about 18, right? And then years later, Colin Kaepernick does what he does, and he's considered a hero by black people, right? He's considered a hero by not even just black people, but many people around the world view Colin Kaepernick, a man who was a millionaire making millions of dollars a year as a quarterback, a black quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, right? And the reason I emphasize black quarterback is because historically, quarterbacks in professional football have mostly been white guys because they've been the team leaders. And of course, the coaches, the managers, the upper staff all want a white guy to be the team leader, especially of a group of black men. And it wasn't until very, very recently that black men started to become quarterbacks. And if I'm wrong about that, please remember, I don't give a fuck about sports. I don't care about sports or sports history. So I just want to emphasize that, though, for people who want to attack me if I got that wrong. But generally, most quarterbacks are not black men, right? And Colin Kaepernick was in a very privileged position to do that. And he decided to give it all away when he said, no, I'm not going to stand for your flag because I'm standing up against police brutality. I'm taking a knee to show that this country needs to be better. I'm using my platform by disengaging, which is fine. The same thing that I'm doing with my Blackset series. We can try to change America. We can try to make America a better place. But for your own sake, for your own family's sake, for your mental health, for your well-being, it might be better to disengage as a sign of protest. That's why I left America. That's why Colin Kaepernick took a knee. I do have some conflicts with how he explained why he took a knee, because he said he did it to protest against police brutality, as if that will end, right? But I feel like Colin Kaepernick truly took a knee because he is dissatisfied with America as a concept. He understands that America is a truly, at its core, white supremacist nation, and that it will never change. So I'm listening to Kaepernick and reading between the lines after listening to his interviews and his explanations and stuff like that. And I'm reading between the lines and I'm seeing a person who truly believes that America will never change. So I'm like, when will you get up from a knee if America will truly not be a white supremacist, racist, evil nation? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to say. That's my issue with Kaepernick in that. But overall, I support his right to protest, and the people who attacked him for protesting are racist, evil people, right? Let's continue reading. Much of the debate generated by Kaepernick has been on subjects directly connected to his actions: police brutality, free speech, and the rights and obligations of professional athletes. But it's also sparked a nationwide discussion of something more tangential that no one saw coming: the meaning and history of the Star-Spangled Banner itself, including whether it should be rewritten or replaced entirely. Yes, it should. It should be replaced with Hit Me Baby One More Time by Brittney Spears, the one song all Americans can agree on. The very fact this controversy was surprising may be the most significant thing about it. It's the clearest demonstration possible that even in 2016, the U.S. has barely begun dragging the unflattering aspects of its past out into the light. Part of that means facing the reality that everything about the Star-Spangled Banner, its lyrics, its author, and the path it took to becoming the national anthem is inextricably bound up with America's gruesome history of racism. The meaning of the hireling and the slave. It took 117 years from the time the Star-Spangled Banner was written in 1814 until it was legally enshrined as the American national anthem in 1931. Francis Scott Key wrote the poem that became the song's lyrics on September 14th, 1814. Wow, that's ironic. That's my birthday. I never knew that. Little trivia today. The national anthem was written on the same day an anti-American would be born, hundreds of years later. After witnessing the British bombardment of Fort McHenry in Baltimore during the poorly named War of 1812. As The Intercept recently noted, Key's little-known third stanza includes these lines: "No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." By the time Key wrote these words, the British military included a regiment of former slaves called the Colonial Marines, whom the British had encouraged to escape and then trained and armed. I want to give this little history nugget for people. The British, when they were fighting the U.S. both times in the Revolutionary War and in the war in 1812, they encouraged black men to join the British Army. And they promised them, if you join the British Army in this cause, we will give you freedom. And a lot of black men did it. And I know for a fact if I was back then, my black ass would have joined too, if not ran to Canada, because It doesn't make sense to fight for a nation that's talking about we want to guarantee liberty, justice, and equality for everybody except the slaves, the Africans, the people who are 3/5 of human beings. Some people, some Americans might say those people are traitors. Well, you guys want to call black people who want to fight for their freedom with the British traitors, but you guys are literally fighting for your freedom from the British. So I thought the main core that aligns you with these people is fighting for freedom. If you didn't want them to not fight for the British, how about you make those black men free? But no, that's impossible for you to imagine. And people who say that often say, well, the Constitution was written to eventually phase out slavery. It's not true. It's not true. We literally had to have a war to end slavery. And slavery was going to be expanded if it kept going the way it was going, because every new state that was joining the U.S., one state had to be free, the other state had to be a slave-holding state, and that sort of thing. And it would have kept going that way if some good people, black people and white people, said enough is enough and something had to change. So let's continue reading. In fact, just weeks before, on August 24th, 1814, the colonial Marines had participated in the Battle of Bladensburg outside Washington, D.C. The Bladensburg fight was a quick, embarrassing defeat for American troops, something Key knew because he'd witnessed it up close as a volunteer aide to a U.S. general. The British forces, including the colonial Marines, had then continued to Washington the same day, infamously occupying and torching the White House. I know he was pissed. I know Francis Scott Key was so pissed when these British people came over with these black slaves, the black freemen, black former slaves who are now freemen, came to the White House, put their feet on the desk, and then burned the house down. Little known trivia fact, the White House was built by black slaves and then burnt down by free black men. It's so inspiring, isn't it? The Intercept stated that slave referred to these colonial Marines. However, an enormous number of readers argued that this identification was incorrect and that Key did not literally mean escaped slaves. Of course, the readers, because the Intercept, like many other places online, attracts the terminally online rights who perpetually complain about anything that doesn't go against their narrative. If you ask the online right, racism never happened in America. There was never slavery, and slavery wasn't so bad, right? Many such commentators cited an obscure website that describes itself as History for Kids and states that slave refers to U.S. sailors who had been seized and press-ganged into the British Navy. The impressment of Americans was a central grievance cited by the U.S. in the lead-up to war. For people who don't know what impress means, it's when a government forces somebody into the army, usually of the other side, right? So let's say Russia and Ukraine are fighting, and Russia captures some Ukrainian soldiers. They're going to impress them and make them fight for Russia's side by sending them on suicide missions or something like that. Others suggested that small r Republican rhetoric from the era often referred to any subjects of a monarch as slaves, and hence the word simply signified all the British. Key himself never explained precisely what he meant by the third stanza. According to Mark Leipson, author of a recent biography of Key, Key spoke about the Star-Spangled Banner in public just once and did not mention this issue. Key did not write about the song in his surviving letters. That said, Leipson explains, while researching his book, he did not find any historians who interpreted the hireling and the slave line as anything but a reference to the enslaved people who escaped their bonds and went over to the British side. Leipson himself also believes it is clear this is the correct way to interpret the stanza. Among the academic experts with this perspective is Alan Taylor, a University of Virginia professor and one of the foremost contemporary scholars of early U.S. history. Two of Taylor's books have won the Pulitzer Prize. One of these, The Internal Enemy, addresses the song's third stanza, calling it Key's dig at the British for employing colonial Marines. In response to questions, Taylor pointed out that it makes no sense to believe that Key was referring to impressed U.S. sailors. American rhetoric of the time cast the impressed sailors as defiant and unbroken by British might, as the exact opposite of the slave. Moreover, Key certainly would not be celebrating the deaths of Americans held by the British. So that makes it very, very clear. Francis Scott Key, when he wrote this third stanza, about this was talking about black people who were fighting against the US because they wanted freedom. And he was against that. He did not want these black people to be free. He thought that they were doing something wrong. How dare you fight against the US government because your black ass wants to be free? How dare you? No safety, no refuge for the hireling and the slave. This is what Scott Key thought of black people. And some people, most Americans know. Fact this. Let's go back. Most Americans do not sing the third stanza of the Star Spangled Banner. We only sing the first maybe stanza, maybe two. I don't know. I know it by heart, but I'm not going to sing it now because I don't want to throw up. But the fact that this still exists and it's in there shows that, when it comes to our nation and our history and our identity, black people have a conflict to deal with. We deal with open, blatant white supremacist stuff in our face, and we have to find a way to love and accept it by omission or commission, that sort of thing. We look at the U.S. Constitution, and they're in there talking about 3/5 of a people, and we have to find a way to love it, appreciate it, or change it. Same thing with this. And in all honesty, the Star Spangled Banner is a pretty boring song. It needs to be updated. We need a better national anthem, something that can bring us all together. That's why I'm voting for Ebony and Ivory by Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson as the new national anthem. Trust me, it will work. It will work. Other academic historians with this view include Jean Allen Smith, a specialist in early American and American naval history and author of The Slave's Gamble, Choosing Sides in the War of 1812. I really want to read that book, so if you're listening this far, find a way to donate that book to me. I think it will be really dope. This was written by David Ridier, Mark Wayne Crewman, and John Belahovlavec. Even Mark Klog, a musicologist and co-founder for the Star Spangled Music Foundation, who strongly defends the song overall, agrees that by slave, Key meant the colonial marine. By the mid-1800s, the phrase hireling and slave could be found in the writing of slavery supporters to differentiate between wage laborers and those in actual bondage. Whether this usage was adopted from the Star Spangled Banner or the other way around is unclear, but William Grayson, a U.S. representative from South Carolina, even titled a famed 1855 pro-slavery poem, The Hireling and the Slave. Grayson contended that slavery had been a blessing for Africans and was morally superior to a system of wage work. Grayson also described whites using a new term he had coined, a master race. This alone is enough for us to say that the U.S. national anthem has to go. I mean, it was written and supported by people who are extremely openly white supremacists and racist, and this is something very unique to America. Most other countries don't have to deal with this. I'm very jealous of my wife sometimes because she can put her hand on her heart and sing the Turkish national anthem or say the Turkish Pledge of Allegiance or whatever exists that is analogous to what I just described. And she could say it with true sincerity and true appreciation. Yes, there might be policies in her country that she might not like. There might have been things her country has done in the past, but overall, Turkey has been a place that has supported and been a haven for Turkish people. We can't say the same as Black Americans. Every other group in the world, by and large, unless you're a Palestinian or Rohingya or some other small minority group, cannot say that their country has always looked out for them. Black Americans, we can't say that. And that's why this national anthem that we have here is so conflicting. And this is it's problematic in itself. I'll continue. I bought an old woman and a little girl. Francis Scott Key could be called the most unknown famous person in U.S. history. A look at his rarely examined life makes clear how difficult it is to separate the national anthem's meaning from its author and his gross hypocrisy on the meaning of freedom. Key was born in 1779 on his wealthy family's Maryland plantation, known as the Terra Rubra. After childhood, he left to study law and eventually moved to Washington, D.C., where he kept one or two slaves as servants. In 1813, the year before the British attack on Fort McKinney, Key wrote to his father to inform him that he had just purchased an old woman and a little girl about 12 to 18 years old. Key offered to send them to his parents to work on their plantation and apparently did so. In a subsequent letter, he asked his mother how you like the old woman and the girl. It's sick that this literally happened, and some people might say it was a different time, but to buy people, you literally have to see them as not people. Key did not see black people as human. So why should I sing his words and with some admiration? Why should I sing the national anthem with some sort of, glee or hope, when if Key were alive today and he met my black ass, he would say, how much are you, boy? Can I buy you, boy? No, this is sick. What a sick man. Upon his father's death, Key inherited Terra Rubra and its coerced workforce. Key was not physically cruel as a master, and during his lifetime freed 7 of his household slaves. One, Clem Johnson, had been the plantation's assistant estate manager. Johnson subsequently stayed at Terra Rubra to help oversee Key's property, both land and humans. I hate when people write this stuff that he wasn't a cruel master, as if owning people in itself is not cruel. I'm so sick of this stuff, and it pisses me off so much when people say, well, not every slave master was a wicked, evil man. Owning people in itself is very wicked and cruel. That's like saying the child molester didn't, he wasn't forceful when he penetrated your 6-year-old sister. He gently glided his penis into your 6-year-old sister's cunt. Let's be real. Owning people is wrong, and anybody who says a slave master wasn't cruel is a sick person, and you can eat my dick. Moreover, as Key's biographer Leapson explains, Key strongly opposed international slave trafficking on humanitarian grounds and defended enslaved people and free blacks without charge in the D.C. courts. If you cherry-picked his words on slavery, you might think he was an abolitionist. That, however, would be almost 180 degrees from the truth. In his work, Key was the prototypical Washington lobbyist. In the 1820s, he parlayed his celebrity as patriotic poet into a lucrative law practice, helping clients with business before the federal government. During this period, Key also represented slaveholders attempting to retrieve their escaped property. In time, Key became a confidant to President Andrew Jackson, one of the worst evil presidents of all time. He slaughtered the Seminoles in Florida, a Native American tribe. He sent the U.S. government down there to slaughter an entire group of people. That was President Andrew Jackson, who now sits on the $20 bill. He was, in today's parlance, a Washington insider. When Jackson appointed Key to serve as district attorney for Washington in 1833, it was not least to enforce the law controlling African Americans, both those enslaved and the city's growing population of free blacks. During Key's 7 years in office, he proved an energetic and moralistic prosecutor, taking on the dangers of fornication and abolitionism with equal fervor. In 1833, Key tried to shut down the capital's bawdy houses, the popular female-run brothels that served both white and black customers. A glance at 20-plus pages of escort advertisements in today's D.C. Yellow Pages indicates that Key failed to stamp out sex work in Washington. The same year, Key indicted John Prout, a free black schoolteacher who had forged papers for a young enslaved couple attempting to escape to freedom. Prout was convicted and was forced to leave town. How sick? How sick are you? This person was trying to help people be free. You indict him, try to send him in jail. Why? Because the law said so? Well, he should have been following the law. John Prout was a lawbreaker. He was a thug and a criminal. How dare he try to help people get to freedom? Oh, fuck Francis Scott Key. The next year, Key ignored the First Amendment to persecute Ben Lundy, a courageous editor who published an anti-slavery newspaper in the Capitol. Lundy and his assistant editor, the young, but soon to be famous William Lloyd Garrison, also had to flee Washington, lest they be assaulted by slavers. For people who don't know, William Lloyd Garrison was a white man who was a very vocal abolitionist and published a newspaper whose name I forgot, and he was definitely very vocal as an abolitionist. He is a hero along with John Brown, one of the few good white men in history. Key, like many U.S. politicians after him, was a stickler for law and order. Blacks who encountered the constables serving Key often ended up robbed or dead. When a white riot swept the city in August 1835, Key sought to quell fears of a slave rebellion by seeking the death penalty for Arthur Bowen, a young black man accused of attempted murder. When doubts arose about Bowen's guilt, District Attorney Key was implacable in seeking to hang him. This perilous battle is recounted in more detail in the book Snowstorm in August by this article's co-author. So Francis Scott Key was out here just enforcing white supremacy, bogarting it with the full force of the law. He was you know what? This is the thing, right? And I should have mentioned this earlier, right? Brittney Griner got locked up because she had marijuana. And a lot of Americans said, oh, how dare they do that to Brittney Griner over there? And, it's just a small amount of marijuana. This doesn't make any sense. Not knowing that in many parts of the U.S., in my state, Louisiana, you can get the same thing. If you're pulled over by the police and they smell or suspect marijuana and they find a small amount, you can get locked up for that. Some might say, well, it's up to the cop's discretion and that sort of thing, but it is still the law. In the U.S., federally, marijuana is illegal. And there are many, many places in the U.S. where even a small amount of marijuana can put you in jail, ruin your life, and that sort of thing. Why am I bringing that up now? Because this guy, Francis Scott Key, was a part of the establishment at the time, and he was enforcing the laws that were on the books. Some people might say, even though he was constantly attacking black people, owning black people, and doing this sorts of things, he couldn't have been racist, right? Let's say he wasn't a racist, but he was still enforcing racist laws. It's institutional, is what I'm trying to say. What happened to Brittney Griner in Russia was, political in its way, but also a little bit institutional, because Russia doesn't allow legal marijuana. Many parts in the U.S. don't allow legal marijuana. The people that enforce those laws are enforcing institutionally wrong laws. And in the case of the U.S., these institutionally wrong laws often tend to be racist. There's not a coincidence that now today in 2023, the majority of people who are held in prison are black men, because they are the people who are paid to enforce the laws are enforcing racist laws that particularly target us. We don't have to look far in history. Let's look at the crack and cocaine differences in sentencing. Many black men are over-policed and over-targeted because we live in communities where drugs proliferate and poverty exists, so people are forced to selling drugs. And because we have these anti-drug policies, the police who show up, whether they be white or black, are enforcing white supremacist laws that attack black men and put us in jail or get us killed by the police. We also live in a country that allows guns to proliferate, illegal guns proliferate in a lot of poor black communities. And because we allow this sort of problem to exist in America, a lot of black men get shot by the police because the police think they have a gun, or they do have a gun, and they are in fear of their lives and that sort of thing. Francis Scott Key, whether he was or was not a racist, was enforcing racist-ass laws that were on the books at the time. And this is why we need institutional change to fight white supremacy. I hope I tied those two threads together, and that makes a lot of sense to you. Because, you know what, I'm ranting and going right now. I'm sweating like a preacher who's just caught the Holy Ghost. I'm sweating like a pimp with one hoe, but I'm going to keep going and keep pressing. So, Key next prosecuted a New York doctor who had moved to Washington with a trunk full of anti-slavery literature. The trial attracted attention across the nation. In the courtroom, Key emotionally denounced the abolitionists who wanted to free all enslaved people. They declare that every law which sanctions slavery is null and void, and that obedience to it is a sin, Key declaimed. That we have no more rights over our slaves than they have over us. Does not this bring the Constitution and the laws under which we live into contempt? Is it not a plain invitation to resist them? Okay, I take it back what I said about Key possibly not being a racist, giving him the benefit of the doubt, as a lot of white people will do, and conservatives and white supremacists will do. Yeah, this guy was definitely a racist. Forget your Constitution. Your Constitution is a piece of shit. I will wipe my ass with your Constitution. People should not own other people. The American Anti-Slavery Society responded by mocking Key's most famous words. In an 1836 broadsheet distributed nationwide, the abolitionists detailed the atrocities of human trafficking in the U.S. Capitol under the headline, "Land of the Free, Home of the Oppressed." If Twitter had existed in the 1830s, that likely would have become a trending hashtag. Hashtag Home of the Oppressed. Let's bring that back. Seen through the prism of Key's life, then the significance of his words about the land of the free comes into focus. For Key, freedom was never a promise available to everyone. White freedom and white lives were what mattered. A monstrous perversion. The popularity of the Star-Spangled Banner grew continuously in the decades after Key wrote the lyrics. By the time of the Civil War, some on both sides tried to claim it as their own. Tellingly, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. felt that if the song were to belong to the North, it would need a new stanza, one he provided invoking the millions unchained who our birthright have gained. By contrast, supporters in the South did not believe it required any changes. The people who fought against the U.S. so that they can keep their slaves said, yep, this national anthem, it's okay with us. We like it. Let's keep it. I wish they took it. So that way, when the South lost, we would have gotten rid of the national anthem and got something new and dope and fresh. By contrast, supporters in the South did not believe it required any changes. Let us never surrender to the North the noble song, the Star-Spangled Banner. The Richmond Examiner editorialized in 1861 in the capital of the Confederacy. It is Southern in origin, in sentiments, in poetry and song. In its association with chivalrous deeds, it is ours. In the subsequent decades, the Star-Spangled Banner continued to be contested territory and the subject of what we'd now term a culture war. By the early 1900s, versions of the song that included Holmes's words were found in school books in New York, Indiana, Louisiana, and elsewhere. When Confederate veterans realized this, they quickly organized to force state governments, including that of New York, to withdraw the textbooks. The New York Times declared that Holmes's words were a monstrous perversion, and Holmes himself was a presumptuous ass. The extra stanza has since largely evaporated and is not a part of the anthem's official lyrics. So that's how it happened. That's how it slowly faded away. I'm learning as we go as well. The skirmishing continued after the carnage of World War I as momentum grew for the U.S. to adopt a formal national anthem. Pacifists denounced the Star-Spangled Banner as a warmongering anti-British jingle. A progressive heiress took out an anti-banner ad in several newspapers, and several Columbia University professors announced a contest for a more suitable replacement. On the other side, Maryland Rep. John Linthicum, that's my porn name, Linthicum, the Daughters of the Confederacy, and other Southern civic organizations declared that the song was the essence of American patriotism. By the 1920s, the battle lines were clear. Those who wanted to celebrate the post-Civil War unity of North and South without reference to the abolition of slavery favored the Star-Spangled Banner. Many Northerners preferred the emancipationist spirit of Battle Hymn of the Republic, or the stately grandeur of America the Beautiful. African Americans had their own ideas, and in 1926 adopted Lift Every Voice and Sing by Florida poet James Weldon Johnson as a black national anthem, which it is. Beautiful song. Every time I hear the Kim Watson version of Lift Every Voice and Sing, a little tear comes down my eye, like the sweat on my beady, bald black head. In 1931, there was finally a clear winner. Congress approved and President Herbert Hoover signed Rep. Linthicum's bill making the Star-Spangled Banner America's one and only national anthem. Controversy ensued within 48 hours. Partisans of the banner held a parade in Linthicum's Baltimore district, led by two color guards, one hoisting the American flag, the other carrying the Confederate flag. The Union Army veterans marching in the parade dropped out and denounced the damned rebels for hijacking the proceedings. In response, one neo-Confederate woman, in what sounds like an indignant Facebook post from this year, accused the offended Union veterans of being un-American and divisive. Ah, yes, the rights accusation. Whenever people bring up injustice or point out something is wrong, you're just being divisive. No, we're pointing out history. Maybe you should look it up. History could be swallowed up so completely. The suppression of history embodied by the Star-Spangled Banner is by no means unique to the U.S. On the contrary, it's universal. The most important and painful realities of any society's past tend to be forgotten unless constant efforts are made to remember them. Intriguingly, one of the most eloquent descriptions of this phenomenon is found in Barack Obama's autobiography, Dreams of My Father. In 1967, when Obama was 6, he and his mother joined his stepfather, Lolo Soetoro, in Indonesia, just 2 years after one of the most astonishing bloodbaths of the 20th century had taken place. Suharto, an Indonesian general, had seized power in 1965 and with U.S. support massacred at least 500,000 leftists and communists over just a few months. That's a shame. I went to Indonesia and, Suharto has a very bad reputation today. I love Indonesia in general, but Suharto was a dictator, and it's sad that we, as Americans, supported him. We put Suharto in power because he was anti-communist, right? Anyway, yet on the surface, Obama writes, there was little sign of this. His stepfather refused to speak of the past, and his mother learned of it only from innuendo and half-whispered asides from Americans when she went to work at the U.S. Embassy. According to Obama, this is the lesson she took from this. The idea frightened her, the notion that history could be swallowed up so completely, the same way the rich and loamy earth could soak up the rivers of blood that had once coursed through the streets, the way people could continue about their business as if nothing had happened. Power, the word fixed in my mother's mind like a curse. In America, it had generally remained hidden from view until you dug beneath the surface of things, until you visited an Indian reservation or spoke to a black person person whose trust you had earned. But here, power was undisguised, indiscriminate, naked. And so Lolo had made his peace with power, learned the wisdom of forgetting. That's powerful writing, and that's very deep. You know, when people forget their history, the cliche is they are doomed to repeat it. But the worst thing about people not knowing their history or knowing the tragedies about history is losing humanity in all of it. We should say it's a shame that 500,000 people died, not because, you know, they were communists or leftists, but because they were people. And when we look back in history and we see that the writer of the national anthem was an open slaveholder, white supremacist, lawyer, fighting for the U.S. government on behalf of white supremacy, and a white supremacist president like Andrew Jackson, we should not forget that that humanity was lost by these people, and that what they did can easily be done again. Yes, it can be repeated. It can be done. And we're fighting these battles right now. But hopefully my voice can speak out against it so people can't forget these things. I didn't know this stuff about Francis Scott Key today, and I'm very happy that I'm able to share it with you. Let's continue. Americans today are fortunate that the penalties for remembering our past, while real, are much less severe than in many other times and places. If we truly aspire to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, we should be able to examine the real history of the Star-Spangled Banner, and most importantly, the degree to which that history is still alive today. Our current difficulty in facing our past honestly and soberly strongly suggests that we are still a long way from laying it to rest. So, I just wanted to also read this part about how sports met the Star-Spangled Banner, but you can pick that up yourself because I actually have to get to work today. But going back to Brittney Griner, I wish the best for Brittney as she readjusts to life living in America. I hope that she's able to find a lot of financial success playing basketball, and I hope that we as black people can realize that, you know, we shouldn't judge other black people by whether they decide to protest or not protest, how they feel about the government, because trust me, the United States government doesn't care about us. We have to care about each other, and we are able to fully express ourselves any way we see fit. We've earned that right as Americans because we've been there from the beginning, and nobody can take that away from us. So I hope you enjoyed this content. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. My name is Simon Hill, and peace.